Welcome everyone to another 2026 Privacy at Michigan event. Continuing the celebration of International Data Privacy Day. We had our kickoff event last week. This one, it's wonderful because we're in person. Last week was well attended, really nice, but like many of us, I'm a little tired of Zoom, and I like actually seeing people live and in the flesh and being able to offer them cookies and refreshments. So I'm Saul Berman. I'm the University Executive Director of Privacy. I also have a faculty appointment in the School of Information where I teach on privacy and surveillance. And along with Professor Florian Schaub from UMSI, we've been organizing U of M's Data Privacy Day, Privacy at Michigan events for more years than I care to think about now. It's actually pushing close to 10. And this year we have an amazing events planned that actually run through March. So we don't take Data Privacy Day, which is officially January 28th, as a singular day. Every day is Data Privacy Day. At least for privacy event particulars, we extend this out all the way through winter semester here at Michigan. So as with all of our events, this is brought to you by Information and Technology Services, the U of M School for Information, and the Dissonance event series. Before I introduce our guests, just some housekeeping. Silence your devices as best you can. And know that this session is being recorded, so thank you, Joel, in the back. And it's going to be available on safecomputing.umich.edu, so stay tuned if you want to refresh yourself. If you want to share it with friends, it will absolutely be available. So today's topic takes us down a different multidisciplinary privacy path. Our first event was about privacy and at-risk populations, specifically journalists. Today's event, and it was delivered by journalists. Today's event is about privacy and children, another at-risk population, and childhood development. So we're going to explore digital privacy from a child's perspective, and joining us today is Lauren Girouard, an NSF postdoc researcher and scholar here and at Harvard, and I will let her share other good news if she's so inclined. And to better introduce Lauren and frame the subject, I'm super pleased, and we all should be, to have Susan Gelman here. Susan is the Heinz Werner Distinguished University Professor of Psychology and Linguistics and a world-renowned expert in developmental psychology, especially with children. So Susan, please do the honors. Thank you, and a round of applause for Susan and
So good afternoon. We're really lucky to have Lauren Girouard speaking to us today. She is one of the world experts in how children think about privacy, and has done an amazing amount of really creative, original, and important research with young children, looking at how they think about digital devices, when they trust and when they don't trust, how things change with age. These are really fundamental issues in order to understand then how to move forward and make our environment safer for children. I want to say a little bit about Lauren. She's really an amazing scholar. I've been fortunate to be able to collaborate with her in her postdoctoral fellowship here at Michigan and Harvard, which is funded by the National Science Foundation. She's an expert in children's beliefs about AI, chatbots, and how these beliefs translate into digital privacy in home environments and in the classroom. And Lauren got her PhD in experimental psychology from the University of Louisville in 2024. She then was a postdoctoral fellow in an NIH-funded postdoc in the psychology department here. And then she, after just a couple of months on this very prestigious, difficult to get NIH postdoc, she got an NSF postdoc on a grant that she had written. So that tells you something about Lauren's really, amazing abilities. She's also a stats whiz. She's phenomenally creative, and she is really has a wonderful mentoring record as well, which some of the students that she's mentoring are here in the audience today and can speak to that. The other thing I wanted to mention is that Lauren will be split between here and Harvard through the end of 2026, and then she will be starting a tenure-track academic position at the College of New Jersey. So Congratulations. And Lauren will be speaking to us today about exploring digital privacy from a child's perspective. Thank you, Lauren.
All right, while I wait for that to load, hi, I'm Lauren, so beautifully introduced as someone who is a postdoc. It is quite strange and wonderful to hear myself described as an expert in anything, let alone a world expert. I will try to even begin to live up to the moniker. I'm really excited to be here, and as was mentioned, I'm currently a postdoctoral scholar, both here at the University of Michigan and at Harvard as well. And one of my particular areas of research looks at how kids understand privacy, data, and the technologies that surround them. So today I want to talk about children's reasoning about their own digital privacy. Because when we talk about digital privacy and kids, so often the people having the conversations are adults. Policymakers talk about digital privacy, parents, educators, and researchers, but often we don't ask and pause to reflect on what kids are actually thinking about their own privacy. What did they understand about their digital lives? So that is what I want to cover today. And I'm sure that in this particular audience, I don't have to convince you that this matters right now, but I have some statistics that I thought were particularly prescient to this topic that I wanted to share. So the first is that 1 in 5 teens say that they are on TikTok and or YouTube almost constantly. That is 20% of teenagers that are saying that they are using these things not once a day, not several times a day, but so often that they have lost count. When we go down to at least once a day, we're talking about over 80% of teenagers in the United States. And by the time a child is 5 years old, they are in front of some sort of screen for approximately 3.5 hours per day. With 25% of 8-year-old kids actually having their very own screen that they can take and port around with them. I'm of course talking about a cell phone. If we're talking about tablets, over half of children by age 2 have a tablet that they can call their own. And I'm not here to judge screen use today by children in our hyper-digital society, or even to suggest that these numbers are wrong or alarming. They quite simply are. And given that this is the truth of the reality that we're dealing with, what I want to talk about today is what all of this means for how we talk about children's digital privacy and some of the ways this story is complicated by our ever-expanding digital age in which we find ourselves. So there's this quote that I think really nicely sums this up, that our youngest children are on the front lines of an unprecedented digital transformation. From AI to immersive gaming, they're experiencing technologies that didn't even exist a few years ago. And this is coming from the founder and CEO of Common Sense Media, an organization I'll talk about quite a bit today as being on the front lines of thinking about kids and digital privacy. So he definitely has his finger on the pulse of what's going on. And I think that anyone who has had a child, knows a child, seen a child out in the world at some point before is aware of the fact that kids are quite online. They're some of the most vulnerable members of our society, yet there's remarkably little internet regulation or online privacy protection in the United States that's designed specifically with their developmental needs in mind. So let's start with thinking about some of the stakeholders, some of the adults that are having conversations in the room, sort of where we are to date, and then how children's perspectives can broaden the way that we think about their digital privacy. So I want you to think for a moment about the question of who is responsible for keeping children safe online? Is it their parents who oversee their children's daily lives? Their teachers who increasingly integrate technology into learning? Nonprofit organizations like Common Sense Media, whose very missions are supposed to be to talk to stakeholders about children and technology. The government, through laws and regulation. Companies who design platforms and collect data. Do children themselves play a part because they need to develop their own technological skills or risk falling behind? And the answer, of course, is that all of these constituents are in some level at play, but each sort of face their obstacles and consequences to their participation in our digital world. So let's start with parents. Parents are often positioned as the first line of defense for children and their sort of online lives. When I ask my students, I do a form of this that's a guest lecture for undergrads, and when I ask them this question of who should be responsible, and we do this as an interactive poll, the vast majority say parents. And there's good reason for this. Parents are usually the first group of people to be giving children a digital device, and they're the ones that see the child for most of their day, at least by the time that they are old enough to be sort of school-aged. And so there are challenges that parents have that need to be acknowledged, because this idea of, well, it's just a part of parenting. It's keeping your child safe. It's just another dimension of this. Falls short of understanding how complicated it is as a parent to have to be responsible not only for your child's day-to-day life, to feed them, clothe them, send them to school, know who their friends are, who they're talking to, who they're going on play dates with, arrange their extracurriculars. There's now this whole other world that isn't really visible to parents that they're told that they're supposed to help their child navigate. And 1 in 6 parents say that they don't even use parental controls at all. Around 40%, nearly half, say that monitoring their kids' social media use is something that feels like it takes so much time and resources from all of the other things that they're trying to do. 20% of parents feel like they can't find that information to be even able to begin to do it. And for those that are doing it, about a third say that they're pretty sure their kids can get around it anyway. So what does it matter? And according to this Mott poll, something that's really important to consider is that 50% of children ages 10 to 12 in America already have some form of social media, which means that some part of their day-to-day life isn't occurring in the world that we can see. It's occurring in the digital one. So the takeaway here is that parents are quite eager to protect their children online. They have a really wide variety of concerns. Recent polling suggests that they're worried about everything from what technology is doing to their child's attention spans and creativity to aspects of social bonding, worrying not only about the fact that kids might not be able to meet their peers in the same way in classrooms, but that they will be more socially attached to the peers or non-peers that they're now interacting with online. And this is quite important to state because 75% of American parents are also doing something else that impacts their child's digital lives. They're sharing pictures of their kids on their social media. So another dimension of this is what we call sharenting. It's the idea that parents are not only both concerned and excited about their kids participating in their own digital environments, but that parents also have digital lives that their kids are getting intertwined with. 75% share info, 81% use real names, and over a quarter have public profiles of that 75% of parents that are doing this, which means that for a quarter of those parents, not only are they using the real names of their child, but anyone can access that information. But parents' worries are often still focused on what we were taught to worry about as kids. Stranger danger, meeting people you don't know, even though a lot of the times the call is coming from inside the house. So we might think about teachers as a way to balance and ameliorate this. Of course, if parents are busy, overwhelmed, stressed, and navigating their own digital lives, teachers feel like a really natural extension of the community that could potentially help kids be safe online. And there's a lot of traditional approaches to how it's been recommended that teachers handle digital privacy. Some of these are that stranger danger messaging, and these often rely on things like scare tactics or rule-based approaches, stories of kids who shared too much information online and then ended up meeting someone who wasn't real. The classic example of this is someone who is a teenage boy who's duped by a teenage girl online and then goes and it's a 40-year-old man who lives in his apartment in a county somewhere far away, right? There's this idea that it's unsafe to be online, that it's scary to be online, that sort of ignores the fact that now from birth kids just are online, and it comes very quickly to be outdated. We're going to take a look at an example of something that was just refurbished and updated for 2025, 2026, and I think you'll see what I mean about how quickly these things sort of fall out of fashion simply because our curriculum isn't getting developed at the speed that technology is. There are better approaches, and these are the approaches that we tend to be turning towards these days. So it is important to teach kids critical thinking and risk assessment skills, and this is something that can intertwine really nicely with classroom curriculum because they're already learning not only about how to access information, but how to do so safely and how to communicate with peers and their teachers about doing this. We can have resources that use developmentally appropriate language, and the goal should be for students to be able to manage their own personal data and maintain their digital privacy. This makes this a skill instead of a rule, and skills can adapt as technology evolves. But teachers can't do this alone. These sorts of materials that are recommended to teachers have to come from somewhere because teachers are so busy trying to keep their kids safe in the classroom they already exist in. It is quite the burden to ask them to come up with these sorts of things themselves. So this brings us to sort of like nonprofit organizations that might serve as intermediaries and provide these resources to teachers. So we're going to take a look at a video that I really like that comes from one of these organizations. Again, this is supposed to be for 2026. And I'd just like you to keep that in mind. This is from Common Sense Media. It's recommended to kindergarten through second grade teachers. So Common Sense is really wonderful, and I, again, don't want to devalue what a resource it is to parents, to teachers, and even to researchers like me who wait eagerly for the Common Sense census on what kids think about digital media and what their parents have to say about how often they're online every couple of years when it comes out. Really, a great resource, but I think that something that you can see from that video that's made for 2026 is that it's really hard for organizations to keep up with the demand of what kids are actually doing online, not to mention having to have a really large team to ensure that things are in fact developmentally appropriate. I don't know how many kindergarten to second graders you know that could readily read those words at the pace that they were going on the screen, but the chances are not all of them. And that makes finding curriculum really difficult for teachers. So their challenges are that material becomes outdated so quickly, and that Common Core standards, the standards they actually have to follow, the things that they're provided by the government, really focus on kids' ability to do things online, like form an internet search in order to get an answer to a question on their homework, rather than how to be a digital citizen, which means that digital privacy is getting lost in these relatively large cracks when the only places these resources exist are places where teachers have to sign up for an account, which means they have to know that it exists. And even when they have access to those updated materials, the lesson plans may be updated, but the things that were made may not, as funding waxes and wanes from year to year. So I want to talk a little bit more about the organizations that do prop up a lot of what parents and teachers are doing to keep kids safe online. I've talked about Common Sense Media, which provides free K-12 digital citizenship curriculum used by schools nationwide. They've developed over 140 lessons on this topic. So again, it's not that the resources are not there, it's just that getting your school district to know that these things exist become a matter of citizenship in and of itself. And we have to ask who's doing that and how do we make it potentially more prolific? These lessons cover a wide range of topics, from things like cyberbullying to media literacy to how to keep your passwords strong, and they recognize that there's different kinds of content that are needed from kindergarten up to 12th grade when you're getting ready to graduate from high school. And they do focus on skill building. One of my favorite things that they focus on is the difference between personal information and private information. So it might be okay to share how much you love soccer online, but not necessarily what soccer field you practice at. And I think that's a really useful distinction for kids to have. And they do things like put it into cute pictures and poetry, like the video that we saw in this nice little poem about how we need to be safe when we're online, so follow the rules to have a good time. It's catchy, it's nice, it works. ISTE, the International Society for Technology and Education, is sort of the flip of this. It's meant for educators to talk about what student goals would or should be if they were incorporated into core curriculum. So let's take a look at how this sort of differs from the video that we saw that was meant for the child. So this is another really great example of a wonderful resource that I am glad exists freely available to communities. But how did this particular teacher and her particular class get featured? They were part of a pilot program, which means that the right person talked to the right person, talked to the right person at the right time. That doesn't mean that this is something that's really diffuse or present at a lot of schools. And that's because organizations like these play a crucial role in translating research into practice and create resources that can scale, but they face a lot of limitations. And these limitations are things like depending on adoption to get reach. more schools have to use this and talk about this and make it something that's important to their district somehow through some means in order for the reach of these kinds of opportunities to expand. And these things aren't easy to search for. I have spent hours combing through materials and trying to see what feels relevant, what can I put in these slides to share with my students, because a lot of what's present is also, if you've ever been on the App Store, I think is a really great example of this, and you've looked for an app that you know is going to be useful to you, so you're looking for a company that makes this app that you trust. There's probably dozens of apps with similar names, promising to do similar things with lots of different quality ratings. That's also what teachers and school districts are facing when they try to find these materials. I know that Common Sense Media and ISTE are really great places to look, but how are teachers and school districts and principals and administrators finding that information? It's mired in a lot of keepkidssafeonline.com that may or may not be a trustworthy place to get these kinds of materials. And organizations ultimately lack the authority to mandate change. They can't themselves say, you should require our materials in schools. We should put that into the Common Core. It's quite simply not their job to make those kinds of legislative decisions. And the people who are making the legislative decisions or promoting different kinds of products to kids are sometimes bad actors. So what does that mean about the government, the people who do have the authority to mandate this change? Well, coverage by the government is spotty when it comes to kids' digital privacy, but it does exist and has existed for quite some time. So COPPA, the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, came out in 1998, and in theory, it prevents data collection from children under 13 by requiring parental consent for kids to engage online at this age, and it was recently updated actually in 2025 to include stronger protections like explicit parental opt-in for targeted advertising, expanded definitions of personal information, and new data retention limits. But there's a really, really key limitation here. And anyone who has ever wanted to look up the website of a brewery or to make a social media account has probably interacted with this, which is that in order to say that you're the age to be able to engage with the thing, what do? Yeah, you press a button, you press a check mark, and kids lie. They do, they lie. And this is where research advocacy ends up playing a crucial role. So COPPA provides a floor, but there's this gap that exists because kids routinely bypass age gates. You'll remember something I said from the mock poll earlier, that 50% of kids have access to a social media account of their own by the time they're 10. A quarter of 8-year-olds do. That is a quarter of 8-year-olds in the United States who are pressing that button saying that they are 5 years older than they actually are. And I don't really blame them for this because it's quite simple to do. It's just a checkbox. And policy is often lagging behind what technology and technological companies are doing, so research advocacy is a way that researchers can talk to the government about what we're seeing and our findings and what we need. So organizations like SRCD play a really critical role in this. This is the Society for Research and Child Development, by holding things like Hill Days, where it gives researchers the opportunity to talk about what we're finding with children, gives children a voice through us to be able to say, this is what we think needs to happen with policy, so that we can translate our research in ways that feel like they practically matter. And there's an example that I really like to cite when we're thinking about why this research advocacy is important. So I went to a Children in Screens Congress. This is another organization that does a lot of advocating for children's digital privacy, reducing screen time, a bunch of things. And you get to present your research on what you think are critical issues at the nexus of some of these things. And COPPA was really on the minds of researchers in 2023. And there was one study that was talking about child users on Instagram and how many public accounts that they could find that purported to be or actually were a child very clearly under the age of 13. That was the focus of the page. It was publicly available and it had not been taken down despite COPPA existing and saying that it should. And they focused on one particular group that I thought was really salient. They focused on groups of tweens, 10 to 13-year-olds, who had created Instagram pages for their classes to talk about who had a crush on who. And they would suggest who would date who by putting two pictures next to each other and saying, these two kids like each other and we saw them on the playground and they should date. And what's really salient to me about that is that those feelings, the things that are driving that kind of behavior, are really normal for that age group. 10 to 12, 13 is the age that we start developing crushes, and talking about those things in our peer group is important. And being online is part of being in a peer group in 2025, 2026, but the way in which they're doing it is inherently dangerous. So something in our system just quite isn't working. And we may think, all right, well, the solution to this is just to create products that aren't so easy to abuse. What about the companies that make the kinds of devices that we use? There have been recent federal developments that suggest that these companies should be more accountable. There's a new act that's come out that's gaining some traction called Kids Online Safety Act, or KOSA. I don't particularly care for KOSA because it gives the government the ability to decide what harmful content is, which means that depending on the whims of the government, children like LGBTQ youth could potentially lose access to vital resources, but it does keep children's privacy and who's responsible for it in the conversation, which is something that I appreciate. The FTC is also strengthening their COPA reinforcement in the age of AI, so they're checking to see whether or not large companies' AI chatbots have violated COPA, and they have. They're going to find that they have, because we know that this is something that's happening in the age of AI augmentation. And there's general growing bipartisan support for children's privacy online and the mental health benefits that come with it. But why aren't companies doing their part? Well, again, I'm not here to say that there is one particular company that is a bad actor. Not my job today, but I do want to talk about the financial consequences to the behaviors that companies are engaging in. And it's that number at the top that I really want to highlight. It's $11 billion. And that's how much major companies that have social media type platforms make every year on advertisements targeted to under 18-year-old users. That number is alarming enough to me, but I want to tell you some others too, because I want to talk about the revenue for users under the age of 13. So this is 12 and younger, kids who should not even legally be allowed to have these accounts. So YouTube gains almost $1 billion from advertisements to kids under 13. Instagram, it's 801 million, and Facebook, it's around 137 million. I think Snapchat is also a really interesting use case here, because nearly half of their total revenue comes from under 18-year-olds. So it's not as big as these numbers here, but it is a massive portion of what they're producing. And recently, I have a very embarrassing story about this. I was sitting in an airport, and I was watching two teenage girls who were making videos of the fact that our flight was delayed and talking to whoever about it. And so I went up to them. Our flight's delayed. I'm bored. I introduced myself as a researcher who's interested in what kids and teens think about online, and I was just curious what they were doing, what they were using. I figured the answer was going to be TikTok. I was so sure the answer was going to be TikTok, and then was really floored when they told me that they were making Snapchat Lives, which was not a feature that I even knew that you could do on Snapchat. And we spent about 20 minutes talking about what they do online, what they like about it, and what they don't like about it. And as we were talking, they got a text from a friend who was in another state, or I guess, I'm sorry, a text, I'm old, a response to their Snapchat Live from a friend in another state who knew that that storm system was the problem for why our flight wasn't going, and was also delayed and stuck in an airport. So they started sending selfies to each other of them looking miserable at the gate. And suddenly, misery had company. So I get it, I really do. But when I asked them what they disliked most about Snapchat, they told me that what they didn't like was that they saw more ads and SponCon, which is sponsored content for the uninitiated. I did have to look it up. Than they do see stuff from their friends. Instagram rolled out the infinite scroll in 2016, and ever since, they've been able to push advertisements to us and to children for as long as they so choose. And they so choose. And they've gotten in trouble for so choosing. So TikTok was fined $368 million by the Irish government because they set children's profiles defaulted to public. And that was decided that that was a bad thing, because it is. Instagram has also gotten into trouble. Meta has gotten into trouble for this. YouTube paid $170 million for collecting children's data without parental consent in 2019 to the FTC. And then Epic Games, who are the much embattled company that makes Fortnite, paid over $500,000 over $500 million in FTC settlements for things that they did, like allowing children to make purchases without their parents' permission and having questionable at best lobby spaces where kids could talk to just about anybody. And the whole point here is that children's attention is valuable. Their data is valuable, and companies have really powerful financial incentives to continue to collect it. Because even when we're talking about $500 million in fines, that doesn't even touch that $11 billion number that companies are making year over year. So they'll pay these fines because the financial incentive is so high. Which brings us to kids. We've talked a lot about who the actors are, from the parents that we think are largely responsible for kids, all the way up to the companies that are making the kinds of things that kids are using. But my question is, okay, kids are using this, companies are letting them, the government isn't stopping it, organizations are doing the best they can, teachers are overwhelmed, parents don't have time. Do kids have a sense of any of this? Do they know that this is going on? Do they care about their own digital privacy, and when and where and how and why? And I've cared about this question for quite some time, and it starts with kind of an unassuming kind of digital device. I will say I'm going to play this really lovely video because I think it's a perfect exemplar of why I care about smart speakers. It is an Ellen DeGeneres video, so just know that this is not a personal indication of my feelings about Ellen DeGeneres. I just thought that these were good clip examples.
Alexa, stop!
Okay, so I think smart speakers are really interesting because kids have these really great relationships with these speakers, and that they feel very comfortable just sort of saying wild things like, hey, do unicorns exist, to their smart speaker? And that means that they're giving information to something that feels very personable, but as you can see in several of these very brief clips, is always kind of having a bottom line, trying to sell something, trying to get some sort of information. So we're going to talk about work that I did with my incomparable graduate student mentor, Judith Danovich, as well as my undergraduate mentee at the time, Haley Strebel. And we're going to talk about whether or not kids think that Alexa can keep secrets. So I want, by a show of hands in this room today, a little tiny bit of participation. Will you raise your hand for me if you would not tell a secret about your life of any sort to Alexa? Okay, so now, no, keep your hands up. I would like you to put your hand down if you don't have any sort of password manager, credit card recognition, password rememberer. Hey, yes, remember my preferences when shopping next time. Yeah, most of us also have these, and they're associated with really large companies like Google and Amazon and Apple, and we're all just kind of trusting them to keep our information safe. So before we judge kids for sometimes thinking that Alexa can keep their secrets, just keep in mind that we often give very sensitive information to technology as well without thinking critically about the consequences. So we asked a bunch of social questions about what kids thought that they could do with Alexa. We asked about different kinds of smart speakers, but I've put this down to Alexa because over 80% of kids in this sample said that Alexa was the smart speaker they were most familiar with or had themselves. And we asked, can you be friends with it? Can you trust it to keep a secret? And if you were lonely, would you want to spend time with it? And this was important to us because they look really child-friendly. I would tell my secret to that dragon. That would be really heckin' cool as a 7-year-old. I would be super into that. And what we found was that 50%, or about half of 6 to 10-year-old kids, said that Alexa could in fact be their friend. And it was the youngest children in the sample, the 6 and 7-year-olds, who were the most likely to want to tell Alexa a secret or spend time with it. So they had an increasing understanding with age that these devices aren't meant to be used to keep secrets. We also asked them why they thought Alexa could keep their secrets or not. And 6 and 7-year-olds really highlighted things like, well, it's my friend, so it wouldn't do that. And it's in my room, so it's mine, so it wouldn't do that. But as kids got older, there was a change in their understanding of ownership. So like, it's mine and it lives in my room, but actually it's my mom's, and I don't want her knowing my secrets. That seems bad. And their understanding of the internet got more sophisticated to the point that they said that they didn't want to leave a recording because the internet might then get access to it and everyone would know, which again I think is a little towards that stranger danger way where our passwords aren't getting leaked online every day. mostly. But I think understanding that risk is important because data privacy breaches do in fact happen all of the time. And it is particularly smart speakers that kids have this relationship with. So work done by a dear colleague of mine, Tess Flanagan, while she was at Duke on a postdoc, she found that kids said, Roomba, it's like your pet. You wouldn't necessarily tell it secrets, it kind of moves around, it can be cute, but you don't have a social relationship with it. Something like Alexa is more like your friend. So things like chatbots, smart speakers, there's a real risk here for data privacy breaches, and kids don't really have a secure understanding before age 8 that that can occur. And that's really important because smart speakers also do something that technology couldn't really do before, which is that we didn't really have to worry about 2, 3, 4, and 5-year-olds going online to get answers to a question or to talk about their lives, because they couldn't do this, and they couldn't do this. And so there was the safety in that. But Alexa, as we've seen from these videos, can be used by a 2, 3, 4, 5-year-old who knows how to say, I miss daddy, and yes, bring me daddy. All of a sudden, that information is recorded. It's there in Alexa's system as a question that was asked, and a much younger population that doesn't understand what's happening is suddenly vulnerable. So I want to turn from smart speakers now, as much as I could talk about smart speakers all day, and talk a little bit more about, okay, so we've talked about sort of giving over information in young kids, but what about the internet in general? What about social media? These places where we really think about kids giving personal information away sort of freely. So we've taken a look. Again, this was work that was done in my graduate schooling time with Dr. Judith Danovich. We've taken a look comparing the internet, smart speakers, and Google search, asking about a bunch of different kinds of capacities that kids may or may not believe that these different devices had. And I want to focus on the internet. So in this study, kids are told things like, Grace wants to know when her friend's birthday is. So she uses the internet to find the answer. A web page about her friend says that her friend's birthday is February 5th. That's my birthday, by the way, so it's right around the corner. Out of curiosity, how many of you think that the internet can tell you things like this in real life? Like if we were to go to the internet and we were to find a web page about our friend, we might be able to see what their birthday was. Okay, I feel relieved. The Facebook era has not left us. Yeah, birthdays are pretty readily available. And before you start to think, oh, well, Facebook is for geezers these days, keep in mind that every time you see someone holding those age balloons and they post a picture on their Instagram or a little video on their TikTok and they post it on that day, all of a sudden you know how old they turned and what day they turned that age, and all of a sudden you have a lot of information about that person. So a picture can also do this sort of thing. So adults, we have this intuition. Kids did not. Even 12-year-olds, 12.99-year-olds, were very, very certain that the internet could tell you about celebrities, their birthdays, hometowns, and alma maters, but not everyday people. And we picked birthdays, hometowns, and alma maters because these are the things that tend to be featured in bios even when the rest of your account is private. So the Instagram bio, for example, as well as the TikTok bio, is something that's just out for anyone to see. And the amount of students that I have seen that have, University of Michigan class of 2026, I know what year you were born. Like, I know things about you for most students. Yes, there's non-traditional students, and we can think of all of these exceptions, but for the most part, it's giving away a private piece of information without thinking about the fact that we're doing it because our account is private. So the fact that kids who are right on the precipice of the legal age to be able to share this kind of information online think that absolutely not, you can't access that information, startles me a little, and is important to consider when we're thinking about how we teach about digital literacy. Because something that seems to be getting lost when we asked kids about, what's going on here, why don't you think that information is available, is that there seems to be a lack of connection to the idea that every social media page has a URL, that it's a website, that you get to it online and not just through an app that you click on that's a little picture. And we can think about how technology has been streamlined in this way for years, because I remember the sound of dial-up internet, and I had to understand that like the phone couldn't be used while you were doing dial-up internet, and you had to plug things in, and when the computer didn't work, you troubleshooted that by taking the plug out and plugging it back in, right? There's this physical process to how technology works that is essentially gone. We have a fairy in a box. We have a black mirror. That's it. And a lot of that has become very visual and not connected to the pathway that's actually happening behind it. And so kids are losing the idea that when they put information on their TikTok page, they're putting that information online. And if they're going to be using these things legally, that's something that they need to know. So, related to this, work has been done on what kids think about other people knowing where they are. So this is everything from things like on your Instagram bio, you have what your hometown is, but you also have what city you're traveling to because you're excited about the fact that you're in Italy for a month. To things like, I asked my most recent group of undergraduate students how many of them had casual friends who could always see their location on their Find My, not their partners, not their parents, like the person who lives down the hall. And the vast majority said, yeah, there was at least one person that they knew that they were not intimately involved with or had known their whole life that could see where they were at all times indefinitely. And usually they phrase this as a privacy and security feature. Someone knows where I am, so if something happens to me, they are aware of it, and not something that is tracking their GPS location indefinitely for a very long time. So, Dr. Susan Gelman has done this work in 2018 and 2021. We're going to talk about some of these early studies that ask, do kids have an understanding of whether or not it's okay to be tracked by something? And the way that this worked was that kids were shown this special red button that showed a picture of a room that was next door to where the child was. Essentially, it's a GPS tracker. And it lets you always see where something is. So in this case, it was a backpack on a couch. And then they were asked about themselves and about a stranger that was described as Sam. And they were asked, is it okay for you to look on a computer and see where your backpack is? Is it okay for Sam to look on a computer and see where your backpack is? Is it okay for you to look on a computer and see where Sam's backpack is? And can Sam look for his own backpack as well? And what they found was something that showed us what kids are thinking about in terms of their digital privacy and tracking over age, with the youngest kids not differentiating at all between tracking themselves and tracking others, and viewing it all as really good and really okay. Totally okay, 4 and 5-year-olds say, for Sam to see where my backpack is and for me to see where Sam's backpack is. 6 and 7-year-olds begin to see tracking as less okay for others to do than for you to do yourself, but they still view both of these things positively. So there's a difference, but it's still good. And then 8 to 10-year-olds have a stronger distinction. They feel very neutrally about others being able to access this information, but they still don't feel negatively about it. It is not until adult undergraduate students in this particular study that they found that it was explicitly not okay to be tracked by others, which means that something happens in adolescence to make this occur, this sort of shift to, no, I don't want other people knowing about me. Kids are quite naive in this regard. And so the implication here is that younger children don't yet have the privacy intuitions that adults are taking for granted every day. They not only don't object to others they don't know tracking them, they think that it potentially has some sort of benefit, that it's okay, that it could be positive. So Dr. Gelman and her colleagues were curious if this would differ if it was about an in-group, so someone who is like you in some way, or an out-group, someone who is unlike you. And so what they did in this case was they broadened the age range to see what might be happening in adolescence. So we've got 5 to 17-year-old kids now, and adults again. And they asked about hibbles and glurks, which were 2 groups of individuals that were not necessarily made up, but they don't exist. The words come from like a very specific vocabulary generation where we get all of these fun words that we've made sure and normed that kids won't think they mean something. And what they did was essentially the same tracking experiment here, where they had same group trackers, so these are 2 hibbles looking at each other, or different group trackers. So what if a glurk is looking at you? And this time the GPS device was on a dog collar. And what they found differed between whether it was same group or different group tracking. So with same group tracking, kids under 11 were like, yep, that's great. If someone is like you, it is okay if they can see where you are in space. Kids over 11 and adults said, no, That's not okay. We don't want that to happen even when there's this familiarity component. Again, tweens are developing their autonomy and they don't want to be viewed even by someone who is close to them. When it came to different groups, a very different developmental trajectory occurred with kids as young as 7 saying, I don't know that it's okay for someone who is in a different group from you to look at your information online, which is interesting because Sam is also a stranger in the 2018 study, but I think there's something about providing that distance and making it so there's this really big distinction. A Hibble is a different kind of person than a Glurk, eats different food, acts differently, has different habits, where Sam might be like a child. We don't know a lot about him. And so kids under 7 are like, yeah, it's okay if this other person who doesn't know about me has this information. But by 7, kids are starting to be savvy, then maybe that's not okay. Which means that stranger danger is something that kids understand really intuitively from a pretty young age. By the time they're in early elementary school, stranger danger is really clear. But again, often, the call is coming from inside the house. And that's what I really wanted to focus on, is what about the people who aren't strangers? Do you think it's okay explicitly if they view and post your information on social media? They have this idea that stranger danger is a bad thing, but that something we need to keep in mind is that most privacy violations are actually coming from familiar entities. I want to bring your attention again to the study with the Instagram profiles. It was their peers, their classmates, who were putting their picture online as a funny, cute thing to talk about crushes. Often it is the people closest to us who have the ability to put that personal information about us out into the world intentionally or unintentionally. So, in current ongoing work that we're hoping takes this to that next step, this is work that I'm doing here at University of Michigan with Dr. Gelman and with my current undergraduate student mentee, Jacob Williams, who's in the room and has really spearheaded a lot of this, and I'm very grateful for that. We are looking at 6 to 13-year-old children and asking whether it is okay for their parent, their friend, a stranger, an employee of a social media site, and an employee of a social media site to both view and post information online. And we're asking about social media this time explicitly, because something that gets brought up a lot with my internet study is that I said a web page about your friend, and maybe they weren't explicitly linking that with social media. And so this time we're asking explicitly, this is about social media. I made this social media website. It's called Zingo. This is the profile that you can have. It has your avatar, and you can put whatever you want in your bio. And so then we're asking kids questions about who can put information in your bio for you. And this is ongoing. I am going to show you a little bit of preliminary data because I always think that's an exciting way to end a talk. But keep in mind that this is with about 112 out of a full 216 kid sample, so we're at about the halfway point. Yay, I think we will all be excited when we cross that finish line. So we know about the setup here, and this is the findings so far. It's kind of tiny writing, but I'm going to tell you that this perfect stepwise regression was the best day of my life. And what this is showing is that kids say that there was no difference between viewing and posting. So we're just going to combine them into online activity. Who can do online activity on your behalf? 91% of kids said, my mom can. 80% of kids said, I can do so myself. We think this probably reflects that kids under 13 know that legally they can't do so. Around half of kids, 60%, said that an employee of Zingo could do so. Around half said that their friend could do so. And around 25% said it was okay for a stranger to do so. So we have this rating scale kind of that's happening of mom to stranger in terms of who it's most okay to put information online. And I think this is really important because I mentioned earlier that 75% of parents are including information about their kids on their own social media, with 81% of those parents using real names and a quarter of them having public profiles themselves, which means that kids trust their parents to know what is best for them. They think it is okay if that is something that their mom wants to do, put their information online. And so that leaves us with a really important question to consider. If kids as old as 13 think that it's okay for parents to view and post information about them on social media, what responsibility do parents have in return to make sure that their children are truly consenting? If kids think that their parents have their best interest at heart and so they trust them to share that information, then it is parents' jobs to be transparent about what that information is and what it means. I know that I am at 5 o'clock. Good news, I'm at my key takeaways. We started on Michigan time, so I hope you'll allow me a couple of minutes of Michigan time. I've got about 2 minutes left. So I have 4 key takeaways here that I want to tell you about. The first is that children's privacy intuitions, whether it's about a smart speaker, social media, or the internet, develop gradually and often slower than we might think, such that even by the time a child is at the age where legally they can engage with social media, it doesn't mean that they know how to. And sometimes we take those experiences for granted. The second is that familiar entities often pose the greatest privacy risk to kids. I think about a mom influencer that I happen to follow who talks a lot about how she'd never let her child play Minecraft, but then posts pictures of that child in his Halloween costume. And what that means about how we view digital consent. Again, I don't want to place blame on the mother here because what she learned about digital privacy was stranger danger, and she's not a stranger. So we need to be thinking really critically about how the people closest to kids are interacting with kids because kids think that it's okay to have their digital privacy violated in this way. The third takeaway is that current protections, quite frankly, are inadequate. I'm not going to call out again any one particular company or governmental organization, but there were gaps in what I said in the first half of this talk over and over and over. And with some of the most vulnerable members of our society, I personally am not comfortable with how frequently our system is failing. And skills are more important than rules. It's more important for kids to learn something that they can take with them over time and use it again, instead of being told no outright. Anytime we say no or never, often that's when kids want to find a way around the rules. So a 19-year-old student of mine said that I could share this. So they had said to me, I feel like I can keep myself safe online, but I really worry about my 11-year-old sister. I feel like she doesn't even know what private means anymore. She has an Instagram all about her fictional crush that uses her real first name. It makes me really nervous. And so the thought that I sort of want to leave you with is that technology is entertaining, its functionality is cool, but is privacy itself for kids disappearing as we accept the downstream consequences of having digital lives? Well, it's out there, my mom's posting it, she knows what's best, my friends are posting, I have this account, it's okay. Is that sense of privacy being important, Find My being something that maybe we don't want to use indefinitely, sort of disappearing? And I think the answer depends on how and what we decide to teach kids next. Thank you. This is Judith, Haley, Susan, obviously, and Jacob. Thank you very much to my collaborators and to all the kids that participated.
Questions from the audience? Really, there's some.
I've perfectly covered it, I know.
Great talk.
Thank you.
This last point that you ended on, I'm curious whether you think that there's actually now a positive sense of putting oneself out there because, I don't know, teens and young people like the idea of being famous. Like there's this extra, like being viewed by everybody is this thing that didn't used to even be
going
a
viral.
possibility.
Yep.
Yeah, so it's not just, they're not just, oh, this is very, this has a lot of functionality for me personally, but there's this whole flipping of privacy so that, being non-private gives them the opportunity to be, known by many people and have that degree of fame, which somehow people seem to like. I don't know why.
Yeah, so the best piece of evidence that I have for that is actually something that Jacob added to the Dipper study that we asked kids about in terms of, is it okay if you find a famous person's personal information online versus an everyday person? And we asked kids to talk about if they've done so themselves and why it might be okay or not okay to do this. And something that kids bring up a lot is that when you're famous, you have your own responsibility for what you put out there. You've decided to be famous, and so you know that part of that is that you have no privacy, that you have somehow given up that piece of agency. And so if we think that kids want that fame, that feeling, and I think it is a positive feeling, kids now will talk about wanting to be an influencer when they grow up. It is considered a viable career for kids. There are plenty of kids who are like, I want to make my money on Twitch playing video games. I want to make my money on YouTube. I want to make my money on Instagram. And we're not telling them no, because we really can't, because those people do make a lot of money and it's successful. And if you're creative and that's what you want to do, it's a pathway available to you. So if that is desirable, and kids think that that group of people have their own responsibility for putting that information out there, then I think it is a part of it. They think that trade is fair. And again, I don't think there's blame to be placed there, because think about how many trades we make with our information. How okay we are with how present security cameras are and our Ring doorbells, and how okay we are that we press those terms and condition buttons at the bottom of every website or accept every cookie like we're the cookie monster, because that's just what we have in the name of a personalized experience. So I certainly think that's part of it. If public persona is good, then privacy is unnecessary.
Thank you. It's wonderful. I was just thinking about the different ages of children and up through adulthood. And in adolescence, you're like, something happens in adolescence.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been thinking about a lot about that and looking into research, like that the developmental work of that age is to say, kind of like, you are not the boss of me.
It's identity
I'm the boss of
formation.
you.
Yeah.
So I'm like thinking backward in the other developmental stages, and whatever the work is that developmentally for that age group, if we could speak to that, whatever they're trying to do then to convey what's important, what could be important to them privacy-wise. I don't know how to really articulate
Yeah.
that, but mapping across those ages in order to meet them with a language that makes sense to them.
Yeah, it sounds like
just, I guess, has anyone looked into that? Like, how could you speak to them at that developmental stage specifically through that? Because it just triggered my thought when you said adolescence, something happens then. I'm like, yes, it does.
Yeah. And I think that what you're advocating for is what we're hopefully doing, which is thinking about things from a child development perspective. What is happening holistically with the rest of the child that means that they need to be talked to about digital privacy or digital citizenship in a certain way? And there's lots of different ways that I think that we see this bear fruit. One of the ways is when we're talking about smart speakers, things that can now be accessed vocally, and kids want friends, they're playing an engaged play instead of parallel play for the first time, right? That's something we know developmentally about that group. So we can't be surprised when the same kids who want imaginary friends are getting really attached to their smart speaker. And that's something we need to consider when we're thinking about what we tell them about, no, it's not okay to tell Alexa that we want daddy, because then that's recorded in the ether forever. And I think that these different, obviously, not quite like that. No scaring. No scare tactics. We said that was bad. But it is this sort of idea that at each phase, something is happening with the child. And I would even argue with the adult, because I think young adults and college students are also really on the precipice of this, particularly with what they're willing to use AI for and what that can mean in terms of more broad-ranging consequences about their own creativity, problem solving, and privacy. But that's another conversation for another time. But I think that developmental trajectory is certainly important, and I would think that the psychologists in particular that are working on this and are working with particularly people in information and people in education are advocating for that developmental perspective for that reason.
All right, one last question.
Thank you, Lauren. Yeah, thanks, Lauren. Great talk. Really interesting perspectives and overview. I think one of the challenges when it comes to privacy is that even adults kind of struggle with the difference between here's information that I put out there versus I'm using technology and that leaves traces. How do you think about that kind of distinction, or how to approach that when we talk about children, especially young kids, right? Like, how do we teach them that difference?
Yeah, absolutely. First, I just wanted to thank you. You were my nodder today, and I really like having a nodder in the crowd to amp me up that I'm doing a good job, so I appreciated you nodding along. And I think that something really interesting about this is that curriculum is starting to make this distinction. So Common Sense Media actually has a character that has really big feet and talks about digital tracks. It's like a little fuzzy orange guy, and how digital tracks aren't always visible. That there are things we can see, there are choices that we make to put a footprint in something, But then there's also just the walking around that we do that we don't realize leaves footprints, which I think is this really wonderful analogy for how to talk to younger kids about this, right? Sometimes we make a really conscious stomp, and other times we're just walking without thinking that we're walking. But there is this idea that that's something that needs to be done younger and younger, because younger and younger kids are using things like tablets that have agreement points with them, and they're also saying, yeah, I want to play my game, and they're checking the button and not thinking about the path that that leaves behind. We also know this is a real problem with advertisement with young children, where younger children will realize that something is an ad, like they recognize that it's not the primary content, but they don't understand that they're being persuaded, and that if they give in to that persuasion, the thing that persuaded them will know to do it more. And I think that these are the things that we need to start to focus on, are the things that we have these nice metaphors for, that we can talk about visually with young children, because it's becoming something they can access younger and younger. I think it's a challenge. Again, I think it's something that's a group effort, and I certainly think there are actors who are less interested in that effort than others. But I think it is something we need to do, because that invisible footprint gets larger earlier than the visible one. Thanks, everyone.
Thank
This
you,
is fun.
Lauren.
Oh,
I'll do these for you. So this is wonderful. Let me, I'll do a very quick wrap-up, then I think we'll have a few minutes to socialize. So privacy at Michigan continues. So a couple weeks, we'll be back here in the league with a couple Southeast Michigan privacy activists. Professor Florian Schaub, who's gracefully in the audience, will be facilitating the conversation with Chris Girouard and Tawana Petty. So if you want to find out what's going on in Detroit and how tech billionaires are affecting the privacy and the lifestyle of those in the Metro Detroit area, please attend that. We have more coming up in March, as I mentioned. We'll be capstoning it with a U of M grad, Cindy Cohn, who's the outgoing executive director for the Electronic Frontier Foundation. So if you're aware of EFF, they are probably the country's premier digital rights advocacy nonprofit. And she will be joining us for a swan song, unfortunately. Someone else will take over, as well as a share from her new book. If you want to participate and do things in the privacy space for not just this month and the rest of your time during Privacy at Michigan, but going on, we have a number of interactive things you can do. So we have 6 words about privacy. You can paint your own privacy portrait. So both of these initiatives are first of their kind in higher ed and maybe anywhere. So please participate. And I think there's posters about our interactive timelines. So do your part, not just to be an audience member, but to actually play and have some fun in the privacy space. It's not all scary, and it's not just the scariness that actually should sell you in this. So finally, our big capstone this year is, for the first time, we're going to be having a student art exhibit. And that is going to be part of a competition around like privacy-themed art. So if you are working with students, interacting with students, feel free. There are real grand prizes that are associated for those that are going to be winners. And that'll be unveiled also in late March. Thank you all for participating. Thank you, Lauren and Susan. And please enjoy the refreshments.